And I stayed with them until 21, 2001.
Okay.
And then I took redundancy from them. They were bought up by France Telecom and turned into Orange Business Systems as exists now. 2002, I moved to Scotland, and I've done various things since I've been here. None of them particularly related to IT or telecoms.
So you're in Scotland.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to go and visit. Maybe next year.
I haven't seen very much of Scotland either. I must probably haven't seen very much of England either. My wife's Scottish. Where I live now, my wife's from a little village about 7 miles away. So for her, this is a return home living here, or has been for the last 20 years. Um, for me, I'd been visiting since 1978. So I was familiar with the area and stuff, settled in quite nicely, but it was actually quite a few years after before I discovered archery.
Oh, really? Okay. About how were you introduced to it?
All right. Well, like all kids in the UK, Robin Hood, Richard Green's Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recollect, for example, hearing of Howard Hill's movie and Errol Flynn until, I don't know, sometime in the last 15 years, I suppose. So I was aware of archery from Robin Hood, but I'd never seen anybody ever doing archery until 2009.
Wow.
And in 2009, the local newspaper here featured an article on a guy who'd started a shoot about 10 miles away from here, shooting English longbows. So I'd phoned him up. And up until then, the only bow I'd ever made was a branch broken off a tree. And those bows never lasted long, and the arrows well, we never had arrows. We stuck on them what we could. And then, like I say, saw this article, phoned the chap up and said, "Oh, can I come and have a look?" So I went over for a look. I shot my first English longbow, and I was hooked the moment I shot it. Um, and that was really my intro, and then just started an exercise of learning and accumulating information about archery and bows and so on. While I went to shoot with this guy, he was very into English longbows. That's all he wanted and would allow to be shot at his place. I got bored with that fairly quickly, and none of the bows he had were particularly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not a particularly small person. I'm both tall and reasonably fit, or was then. Um, but I'd also got it into my head to take part in clout shoots. That was one of the more common things going on in this area. You try and put an arrow close to a target or marker at 180 yards.
Mm-hmm.
All the bows this guy had couldn't get the distance, and that disappointed me. So at that point, I started looking at alternatives. And the very first thing I did was go and buy, I bought two bows more or less at the same time. I bought a Samick 58-inch recurve, and I bought a flat bow, a Korean, well, it was an anonymous Korean flat bow, and discovered that both of those could shoot 180 yards and more without too much effort.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I just started investigating other stuff. I thought, well, why stick with one bow style?
Right.
And then I kind of went a bit apeshit acquiring bows.
Yeah, that's from that starting time from when you got into archery until now, the bows that you've accumulated, and they're very rare, a lot of these
Yeah.
bows.
Uh,
Um, how did that so go on? How the research brought you to all of this, to this point?
well, I shot with him. I shot with this guy for a very short while. And then after about 6 months, I cottoned on to this guy's strange behavior. So I'm not going to mention any names, but it turned out this guy was a bit of an alcoholic.
Mm,
And I didn't really want to shoot with him anymore. but I wanted to carry on shooting. So I started to do a few inquiries locally about hiring somewhere to shoot. And the next thing you know, about 6 months later, started my own club. But in the meantime, I'd approached every club in the area. I started to research who was doing what, researched how to insure it, with governing
Hmm.
bodies, all that kind of stuff. Started my own club, met other people, started to acquire bows for the club. Um, and then through one of the people I met, I was taken to the border archery 3D course.
Okay.
And up until that point, I hadn't heard of border archery. So we're talking about October 2009 now. And this guy took me along to border archery. We shot the course, and I'd never seen a rubber animal in my life before then. And I don't remember how well I did, but I just thought, wow, this is brilliant. And this is so much better than standing somewhere shooting at a target at a marked distance. And at the same time, I was introduced to Sid Nan, who owned
Hmm.
Boulder Archery. As you know now, it's the son Sid, who
Yep.
runs it. Um, I said to them, how do I get to do this more often? And they said,
Hmm.
well, you join our club. Well, how do I join your club? You buy one of our bows. I said, what, any bow, even a second-hand bow? And they said, yes, that'll do. So I ran home. Well, I drove home. I went home. I jumped on eBay, and at that point, I don't think I'd ever bought anything on eBay. I might have. I found the first border bow I could find on eBay and bought it, snapped it up, and it was a border comet, which is basically a wooden riser target bow.
Hmm.
Beautiful piece of woodwork, and I just looked at this bow this guy had, and he'd bought it in '76 himself, and I thought, wow, this is beautiful. And he had a second bow for sale, which was a Hoyt Expert, and I got that. And I thought, wow, this is beautiful too. And that was kind of really the start of it. Prior to that, actually, when I was still living in London, I used to do a bit of furniture restoration,
Hmm.
and I was particularly keen on mahogany and walnut. Never really interested in rosewood, but these bows were typically rosewood I was seeing, and I was thinking, wow, these things are beautiful lumps of wood.
Hmm.
And that just kind of started it. And then I just started to watch eBay a little bit, and then I'd see something else come along, and think, oh, that looks nice. Let's buy that. I'll buy it for someone in the club. But some things I bought just never ended up being passed on to other people. And that really started it. And I don't really remember when ah, actually, I then bought a bow for my wife.
Okay.
I thought, right, I'll get her involved. And I bought her the very first of the Royal Scots bows that I ever owned. It was called a McTavish. And again, didn't know anything about it, didn't know anything about George Berny, so I started researching. Who's George Berny? Yeah. Who were Royal Scots bows? Um, Came across maybe one article that had been published about bow making in the borders, Scottish borders, and basically took it from there. Um, and I got another one, and then another one. Then I started to, how do I parameterize what I'm doing here? And my part of my what I wanted to do was all these bows I was getting. I was thinking, wow, I'm paying peanuts for these things. No one knows what they are, but I want to know how they shoot, and I'd like to let other people know how they shoot. There must be other like-minded people like myself who sees a bow from the '60s and think, well, I was there, but I never saw any of this stuff. What was it like? So that was part of it. And then the second part was, oh, maybe I'll collect one of each model.
That's how it starts.
And then it extended really from collecting one of each model of the various companies that became border archery
Hmm.
from the late 40s onwards. to, well, I keep seeing all these other British bows. Why don't I gather one each of them? So it became British bows, and I try and stick to British bows. Although I have quite collected quite a few American bows. Typically, I would say the cream of the crop of the American ones.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and it just went absolutely silly.
Well, what's funny is I've looked through your photos extensively, and we've shared photos back and forth on our posts
Yeah,
and whatnot. Um, I've seen a few bows in the UK that are UK made, but they look like Hoyt Pro medalists. Some
yeah,
look like a Presentation 2
yeah,
takedown. And but is that something that a UK bowyer wanted to replicate, or is it just happened to be coincidence?
yeah. I think it was. I mean, the Hoyt Pro medalist was probably introduced to the UK about a year after it came out in the States.
Which
So
was around what, 1962,
62 here,
Yeah.
61 with you.
Yeah.
Um, I think prior to that, the major presence here was of Ben Pearson,
Right.
and there might have been a couple of bears, but very, very limited. And I think they all took a look at it, what was going on stateside, and thought, well, if people here in the UK are buying these, being imported, then let's make them. So, to my mind, every man and his dog from the late 60s onwards, Bowyer dog that is, were making bows that looked like it. They just wanted, I presume they just wanted to get a slice of the market.
Sure. Now, did
Um,
back to George Burney, didn't he work for Pearson at one time? Did he make bows for Pearson at all?
yeah, yeah, he was 73 to about 77, 78 latest.
I
So
think
his
his
hyperkinetic limb bows that Pearson did from
yeah.
73.
Was that the Centurion?
Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
Okay.
You've been talking to Bob Frank.
Yeah, Bob and I talk quite a bit. Yeah. He's an interesting sort, man. And he's got a keen eye for beauty. His
Yeah.
bows are just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, well, as obsessives go for the beautiful stuff, and maybe some of the not so beautiful to other people. I've seen a few of your American buddies uh, diss some of George's work. Like they don't like his bows with the vibration dampening slots in them. Yeah, they think it
I
was a
think that's
gimmick.
phenomenal. I,
Yeah, well, talk about Big Wood. I know you used to post stuff on Big Wood bows. I remember looking at some of the things you've posted. Um, but yeah, I mean those are particularly fetching, and they were his top of the range model. Well, in that they sold for the most money.
well, I saw one this past spring. I went to a shoot here in Florida, and this mutual friend of mine was selling a bunch of bows. And in his lot, he had two Bernie bows with the holes in them in the riser,
Yeah,
and at $100 a piece. And
bargain.
that's what I said. But I said I'll come back because I wanted to go shoot. I came back and the bows were gone. I mean, so you got to snatch them. You got to strike while the iron is hot, so to speak.
Yeah, they're not for everybody, and that's what collecting's been a bit like.
Right.
Um, that bows typically, I've acquired a lot of my bows from eBay, but because I publish details of what I've collected, if people find, for example, a Royal Scots bow or a bow they don't know, and they Google its name or the company name or the bow
Hmm.
model, they'll usually end up finding me.
Right.
So I end up with a lot of emails from people saying, "Hey, I've got this bow. What do you think? What's it worth? Is it collectible?" And I'll say, "Well, yeah, it's collectible. It's not worth very much except to a collector. I'll give you 30 quid for it." And that
So
often,
so break it down. What's 30 quid in US dollars?
well, how many quids are in a dollar now? We're about equal, aren't they? Dollars are almost the same as a pound now.
Okay.
And then it might have been $1.50 to a pound, so
Okay.
$45.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, a few people, and then sometimes people will say, no. Yeah, I'll show you one. I've got one here. I've got one here. I've got one out deliberately. I think you've included it.
I was
Let me.
wondering. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Yes. Look at
Can you
that.
see that one?
Oh, yeah.
Now this one, a guy got in touch. You see
Mm.
it?
Yeah.
A bit, maybe a bit
No,
close.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's the King of Scots. That's one of George's. Not to be confused with Idi Amin, as was.
I noticed that picture quite a bit in your photos.
Yeah. Um, that one, it was a guy just got in touch with me. He emailed me saying, "Hey, I've got this bow. Do you know what it is?" So I told him what background I could on it. And he said, "Well," I said, "What do you want to do with it?" He said, "Well, I'm thinking of rehoming it." And I kind of sat back and said, "Okay, well, good luck with that. Let me know if you put it on eBay or something."
Hmm.
And I thought, there is no way I'm going to chase this bloke. I thought, I want it, but I'm not going to chase. I'm not going to show him I'm eager. And I left it, and about a week later, he got in touch and said, "Yeah, we've decided we'd like to offer it to you for your collection." I said, "Oh, well, that's nice." He said, "I said, what do you want for it?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "We'll give it to you." So I paid the postage, and he shipped it to me, and that's that. Now that is
That
the
has never happened in my world.
I've had a few like that, and
Wow.
it's surprisingly how generous some people can be in the archery world. A few years
Mhm.
ago, I had a chap looking for a bow, and I'm known over here for Mister 30 quid because people say, "What's a bow worth?" And I'll say, 30 quid. And that's the kind of number I'd like to pay. I don't
I
always
ha
end up paying it.
I had an old friend of mine, Mike Shaw, and he would always say, "Hey, what do you want for that $20 boat?" It's
Yeah.
like that was the most famous line for any collector I've ever known. That was great.
But so I used to say that, and then a guy approached me. He was looking for something, and I said, "Well, I know somebody who wants one, and or who's got one he wants to get rid of." So I put the two guys in touch, and the guy sold him the bow, and he sold it for 30 quid.
Oh man.
And then the guy who received it, he had one he wanted to get rid of, and I said, "Well, hey, you should, uh, you should, uh, give back what you've received. You should offer your bow for 30 quid." So he found a buyer. And it was actually an interesting three-way swap because one guy's in England, the guy selling the original bow was in Scotland, and the guy who got the other bow was over in Ireland.
Wow.
So
Okay.
we spread them around the British Isles.
So in your archery endeavors, have you encountered or do you have any role models, heroes in the archery world?
No, that's a hard one for me. Apart from Richard Green and Robin Hood,
Right.
and that doesn't bear too close inspection because the bows they shoot are not historically accurate
Right.
in that they're not long bows of any kind. They're actually flat bows.
Mhm.
Um, I archers no, maybe because we don't have anybody who was significant in this country.
Right.
I mean, you guys have got people who were hunting big game, hunting or pioneers in their own right for what they did. Um, and I don't recollect knowing of any guys. I've come across some of the top, mostly what happened in Britain was target archery.
Right.
Yeah. Field archery, I believe, only really gathered um, momentum in the late 50s and through into the 60s. And a lot of that, some will say, was due to the presence of American servicemen in the UK.
Okay.
There's been US air bases in the UK for donkeys since the Second World War.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think some suggest that that's what kick-started it in the UK. Plus, the Americans would have their own kit and would
Hmm.
pass it on. So British archers were being exposed to styles of equipment that they wouldn't necessarily see because everything was target orientated. Um, so we never had any. I don't believe we had any heroes in this country apart from, like I say, champion target archers.
Hmm.
Um, for me, what interested me was who were these bowyers making bows, and a lot of them sprung up in the 60s through to the 70s, and then a lot of them went away again
Hmm.
because the market here just isn't that big.
Now, is
So
there? Is there bow hunting in the in the UK? No.
It's been banned since 1962, I gather.
Okay.
Uh,
And that I did not know. So thank you for that piece of
yeah,
information.
it's been there is a bow hunting group in the UK,
Hmm.
which um, most of Europe operates under a bow hunters licensing scheme. So there is a group in the UK that sponsors training and accreditation through this scheme. And typically, you can get the accreditation by doing the training and or examination in the UK, and then they will go off and hunt Portugal, Spain,
Right.
um, or I do know some people who regularly go to the States and Canada to hunt.
Yeah, I know that there's hunting in Italy, France, and Germany. Because I know
Yeah,
some bow hunters out there.
yeah, that I'm pretty sure that's true. I'm not sure about Germany, France, I think so. Portugal and Spain, I know more about. Um,
Hmm.
but it's not something I keep track of too much, the hunting here. If you can't do it,
Right. Why do? Yeah.
like like I said somewhere else in one of the comments, because we don't hunt for food, we send our wife out to go to the supermarket.
Yeah. So back to bow collecting. Um, at its zenith, or even now, how big or was your collection?
I'll say this quietly. It's just over 400.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah. I
That's
hope the wife
amazing.
didn't hear that. She's back home now.
Okay. 30 quid. That's the thing. You should get a
Hey,
t-shirt made.
some were free.
Yeah, some were free. Okay, we'll leave it at that.
See,
Now,
because I was passionate, a few years ago, 2014, Sid Ball, who
mhm,
owned Border Archery, he phones me up and says, Bern, I've got some bows here. They're in the factory. They were left in the factory by the previous owner. Well, the previous owner had been there since the 70s. So he said, do you want them? I said, well, I'll come and have a look. So I went over to their factory and they got a bit of grass up the front. They operated a little like bucket system where one guy was in the loft of the factory passing down a bow, another one was Sid's son Sid was passing the bows out to Sid, and Sid would lay them on the grass. And this went on for about half an hour, and at the end of
wow.
that, 32 bows were laying on the grass.
Oh my Lord.
And I looked at them, and I'm looking at some of them more than others, thinking, "Wow, I know of this bow, but I've never seen one. Oh, I know of that one. I've never seen one." What was surprising is the variety of the collection. Because I tell you what was included in there was a Centurion as well.
Okay.
So the previous owner, he must have inherited what the owner before him had, which was not George Berny, it was somebody else. But goes back, the collection must go back to George Berny because there's bows from 1951, 52 in there. Yeah.
Hmm.
Which was when George Berny would have been around and or carting the bows around.
Sure.
So it was an amazing cross section of bows. A week later, actually, young Sid phoned me up and said, "Oh, I found another 10 bows. I'll come drop around and get them." Um, so I remember at the time Sid saying to me, "Right, do you want them? How much do you want to pay for them?" And I said, "Well, what do you want?" He says, "I don't know." He said, "Make me an offer." So I said, "Well, say 5 quid a bow." So I came up with a number. 40 times 5 is 200. He said, "No, it's a bit low. How about 250?" So I said, "Yeah, okay." So I bought 42 bows for 250 quid.
Nice.
And like I say, some of those are rare, significant examples of early 50s work.
Hmm.
But right up to, like I say, a Centurion now. How a Centurion ended up in the border archery, it must have been a link between George sending stuff back to his mate who was then now running the company.
Right.
Hey,
Now, George was born and raised in Scotland, correct?
yeah, as
Hmm.
far as I understand it, yeah.
Okay.
Place called Shields, which is about 23 miles from where I live.
Okay.
I should say border archery is about 12 miles from where I live, which is why it was always convenient to go and shoot at their course once I discovered it.
You know, it's ironic. I bought some of the newer limbs that they made that would fit the bear archery risers,
Uh,
and with that extreme curve.
yeah,
Oh my lord, it sounded like a gun going off. That's how they
yeah,
very abrupt, but fast. I mean, fast as hell. I couldn't believe it.
yeah.
Um, so, of your collection, what is your favorite bow?
Now that one I showed you uh, stands out.
Okay.
It's very rare. Uh, it's a beautiful piece of wood. You maybe can't see it in this video thing. Maybe on some of my other pictures you might see. It's Brazilian rosewood.
Yeah.
Um, I just think it's absolutely beautiful made. I don't believe I've actually shot it. Um, I know as I showed it to you there, it doesn't have a string on it. I'm not sure I put a string on it. I must probably have, but I don't remember. Um, and I think maybe fewer than 10 of those were made.
Okay.
So I know one guy in the UK's had two of them. I've got that one. I think I know of another guy's got one. And I was gifted another one, which is not as nice as that one, um, last year or the year before. Again, it was a free. Here, you can have it. Just promote our archery club, when you get round to doing something. But then the other one, which was rare. Um, so that's the King of Scots. He made a takedown. He made what became the first production takedown in Britain,
Okay.
a thing called the Executive, which again is a rather large lump of Brazilian rosewood with some limbs bolted on. And this is the one that looks like the Wing P2.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that.
So yeah, you can see where the influence came from. And I always used to speculate, and I still do, did he ever meet Bob Lee? Did
Hmm.
he meet Bill Stewart? Because those three guys between them designed limbs that no one else was doing. They designed risers and bow shape models
Well,
that no one else was doing.
if you look behind me over my shoulder, you can see
Yeah,
those bows hang up. You could recognize a couple of P2s in there, right in the middle.
yeah, they're good looking bows. So when one of those came along, a P2, I had to buy one of them as well.
65 and 66 were the rosewood handles.
I
And
turned my camera.
oh yeah, oh man.
That's that's just things I've been photographing or playing with recently,
Okay.
and I've got what another room like that, and another space with piles of them.
Let me grab one of these. Give me a second. Got to put my headphones on or else I can't hear. So this is look at I don't know if you could see the wood in this
Yeah,
beautiful piece of rosewood.
yeah,
Look at that profile.
yeah. I think P2s are gorgeous. Actually, one of the American bows I'd like to acquire is a P1 just to go with it. And I
I
don't
just
have I don't have a wood P2.
Yeah, I just sold a P1.
Yeah. I had a bad well, I've had two bad experiences getting bows from the States, so it's unlikely to be something I'd ever actually bother doing again.
Hmm.
It's actually the situation's worse with courier fees and stuff, but yeah, they're gorgeous. I've just waited when these things come up in the UK. Like I said, I've got a P2. I've got a 67 phenolic P2.
Okay.
Personally, I think it's beautiful. I've got I think it's a 61 um, Palomino,
Okay.
which
Beautiful.
again is a good looking bow. So these things did make it across here, and someone bought them or brought them. I've got, like I say, bits and pieces of what I think you guys might think are quite classic bows, and
Hmm.
they look very good. If you remember, it was probably one of the first conversations we had. You identified a bow for me. I had a Herter's U finish bow.
Okay. Yep.
Um, It's the only time I've seen a Herters in the UK.
And Herter's actually sold a lot of bows.
Yeah, I mean they had good looking bows. That's another one. You asked me what kind of bows I liked. I think Herter's bows look good. I'd
Yeah.
love to get hold of some Bud Hits bows.
Well, it's ironic you mentioned that. There's a guy on Facebook who's selling his father's Bud Hit bow, and it's a
Yeah,
one piece where it's there's wood in it, but the riser looks like it has mother of pearl built into it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
he asked me what it was worth. I gave him a ballpark figure. I said because there's not a lot of collectors that collect Bud Hit bows. It's
yeah,
just they're out there. He made quite a few, and I knew Bud Hit. I interviewed Bud
yeah. I remember
and his
watching
wife,
your interview.
and what a super guy. Unfortunately, they are no longer with us. But
Yeah,
he played golf up until his death, and he was in his 90s. Yeah, guy was a very interesting man.
he made interesting looking bows,
Yeah,
and
especially
maybe
with that
maybe
that cam limb that he made. It's
yeah.
really strange lines to it, but they shot. So,
The other one I liked the look of all of their bows was Uzak and Tri-State.
oh yeah, Tri-State. Yep.
Those are bows that never really got over here, but somewhere on one of my pages I post some speculation because one of the other main bowyers in the UK, a company called Marksman,
Hmm.
um, someone reckoned that at least two or three of their models were based on Tri-State models.
Okay,
Oh,
I saw a
very.
couple of those bows, and it didn't the Marksman logo have like a cat's face?
That was it, yeah. A
Yeah,
lynx. It's a lynx,
Lynx.
yeah,
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
those were nice bows. I mean, so what other bows? Well, we got George Berny, we've got Border, Sid and his thing, and Marksman, and then the other one, the P2 one that you mentioned. What other bows were popular in the UK from the UK besides those?
In the 60s, in the 50s, in the early 50s, there were about three bows you could buy in the UK. Yeah, you could buy a steel bow by Apollo.
Okay.
Yeah, who I suppose learned their tubular steel making art doing bombers and fighter planes in the war. Uh, there was a company called Yeoman,
Okay, I know that.
um, and they were headed up by a former British champion. So in I think 1948, the British champions he ran Yeoman Bow Company. His claim to fame was also he was the first person to put a composite, glass and wood bow or prod on a crossbow. So crossbows had gained a bit of ground in that time, but most people were using aluminium prods, which were
Mm.
prone to break and smack you around the head or stuff. It's a
Yeah.
bit like a steel bows. Everybody will tell you the same about steel bows. Wear a hard hat when you shoot a steel bow. So they were the ones prevalent in the 50s. There's a good link with the other main composite bow alongside Yeoman was called Jack's Black Mamba. Well, Jack's was just a sporting goods department store, and they were made for them or designed for them by this guy Richard Galloway. And Galloway was the guy that taught George Berny how to make bows, supposedly. And Berny was apprenticed to Galloway. And Galloway and the guy at Yeoman, a guy called Frank Bilson, they both pioneered making glass in this country. There's stories going around how Galloway had a bed frame that he took the springs out and he would stretch strands of glass out across this bed and then spread resin across the top of it to make sheets of fiberglass that he
Wow.
could put on his bows. Now, it's all anecdotal stuff, but those two guys pioneered glass bows in this country. And so in examples of their bows, you'll see early bows of, look just like normal mat, fiberglass mat. You'll
Hmm.
see linen back bows, silk back bows. You'll see their use of Bakelite on the bellies.
Hmm.
Like and then later on as they started to import them, I don't know if it was so good, their good stuff was so good they'd announce, yes, we've got the latest from America. um, the tough bow
Oh,
tough,
bow tough, yes.
bow tough, and those things. They're interesting bows to look at when you see this brown, you know, especially paper-based phenolic on the belly of a bow. You know, you can see the sheets of paper sitting in the
Mhm.
resin and where it's been sanded down to shape it.
Yeah.
So they were prevalent throughout the 50s to the late 50s, and then I think American glass was coming over and into the 60s.
Mhm.
And then one of the reasons George Berny cited that he left was the difficulty in getting quality bow making materials in the UK. Now, maybe it was expensive to import glass at that time, which is why he cleared off in late 54, went to work for Eddings.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
the Edding Supercast.
yeah. So George Bernie was there until what was he called? Louis Eddings? No, not Louis. Lloyd Eddings, wasn't it?
Lloyd, yeah.
Till Lloyd crashed his plane, and that was the end of his company. You know, there's an interesting diversion for you. Hey, yeah, I build bows. I'm a carpenter. I'm building bows. I've got this guy from Scotland, but in the meantime, I'm building my own aeroplane. Oops, I crashed my aeroplane.
Hmm.
That's the end of my bow building business. Well, it killed him.
Yeah.
That's the end of my bow building business.
It's like a John
That's
Denver
when
story.
that's when George went across to Texas, and he must have been within spitting distance of Bob Lee and
Hmm.
Bill Stewart and these
Oh yeah.
people, you know, all soaking up ideas. And I think in his case, he'll have brought some of that stuff back to England with him when he came back in 64,
Okay.
63.
So these bows that that one especially that you showed me earlier,
Yeah.
about what year did he make those?
66,
Okay.
67.
Okay.
Very short period.
That's
As
my
I say,
favorite time period for bows,
yeah,
1961 to 66, 67. I think that's the most romantic period
yeah.
for archery.
I think you're right. There were other people in the UK. By 60, for example, Marksman came to the market in about 1960. Prior
Okay.
to that, he was making arrows and maybe accessories. And then that's Les Howes. He came to market in about the 60s, and he had quite an extensive range of bows. I think there's a when you did a podcast with Jim Belcher.
Yeah. Well, he's a UK guy.
Yeah, well, I've got the he'd given me the letter his dad had exchanged with Les Howes,
Hmm.
and Les Howes had about Marksman had about seven bow models, um, varying styles, and his dad had written him a letter saying, "Hey, I'm interested in one of these bows. I think it was a model called a Baron. I'm interested in one of these, but I want a 50 or 60 pound one." And Les had written back to Jim's dad saying, "Hey, look, our this bow design will not stand 60 pound. You're better off uh, doing something else, getting something else, or whatever." And I think then Les sent Jim's dad, Jack. He sent him either the kit or the material to make what we call a flat bow, which is what became Jim's dad's Union Jack
Hmm.
hilt style bow that Jack made.
Right.
And it's Jack who really is responsible for the introduction of those bows into the UK.
Okay.
Um,
That's good. That's
that,
good.
that's some people will say it's slightly different, but Jack then taught another guy in the UK who is still alive. He's in his 80s now. There's a guy called Rex Oakes, and Jack made bows originally for him, and then Rex had an archery shop. He quit and started making them himself. He's still going. He made one for my nephew a couple of years ago and taught him how to shoot. You know, I thought this is amazing. A mid 80s guy still making bows and teaching my nephew how to shoot.
Well, there's a guy here in the United States who made bows back in the 70s and into the 80s, and his name is Bob Savage. He made a
Uh,
bow called the Savage Deathmaster, which is a super rare bow, but they shot. They were wonderful bows. He taught Paul Schaefer how to make bows.
uh,
Um, he's still with us and he's still making bows, but not for public consumption. Just he still tinkers with it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get a hold of him, and getting people that are well into their 80s on a podcast is kind of difficult, to say the least, especially
Yeah.
with lack of technology knowledge. So
Podcast? What's that?
yeah, exactly. I said, well, it's kind of like an interview, a radio interview, but it's called a podcast now. So, but at any rate, Bernie, prior to social media, you located bows pretty much word of mouth and eBay, correct?
Yeah, that's largely it.
Hmm.
I would say in the beginning it was mostly eBay. I'd have a search for bows set, and every day I'll have a quick look, see what's come up.
Yep.
Um, do a bit of research because something, back in the beginning, I didn't know. I was also then started collecting the magazines, um, either monthly publications to find out what all these bows were.
Hmm.
I started collecting the magazines, catalogs, and so on. And it took me a while. I mean, I reckon I'd been at it for about 10 years before I even knew what all the bow models were that people had made.
Hmm.
Because until you could get hold of their catalog or you saw an example, and then I'd see examples and I'd think, I don't know what that is. I don't know when they made it. And that for me was the interesting part. What is that? When did they make it? What's it made of? What does it look like? What does it shoot like?
Right.
Oh, better buy one.
Yeah.
Oh, better buy another one.
Yeah. Now, I know I've shipped in the United States to Europe, and I found it kind of difficult. Certain countries have restrictions, etc., when it comes to shipping. I did buy a bear takedown from a fella in the UK. No, actually Germany. He was in Germany, and that
Yeah.
it took about 3 weeks to get here. But have you had any encounters that were restrictive?
Restricted slightly. I had one bad experience. My very first bow I bought from the States. I thought, oh, the price of these, they were made by somebody in, I don't know, Wyoming or Montana. I don't even remember the name of the company.
Hmm.
They weren't glass bows, they were wood flat bows. And I thought, oh, I'll get one, see what they're like. And if they're okay, I'll buy a dozen for the club
Right.
and for other people I know. And it was shipped over, and the packaging was atrocious. It was just like a thin cardboard box with no padding, no nothing.
Oh, wow.
And it looked like someone had stepped in the middle of the bow and snapped it down through the window into the riser. The person who sent it to me said, "Well, tough, claim off the courier." And I said, "Well, hang on. You're the seller, you're the shipper. It's up to you to claim. You need to do that." Blah. They said, "No, no, no, tough." I said, "Well, look, you either do that or I'll just claim the money back, and that's that."
Right.
And they got a bit shirty anyway. Then the next time actually was just a bow swap between me and Bob Bruno.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I know. I've come across all the Bobs, and in fact, I will give Bob Bruno credit for putting bows on a sheet to photograph a whole pile of them. I got that from Bob.
Awesome.
Me and Bob swapped bows. I had a McCulloch Special,
Hmm.
and it turned out Bob was looking for one. I said, "Well, I've got one." Actually, that was in the pile of bows I got from Sid for 250 quid.
Hmm.
So I had this McCulloch Special. He said, "Okay, what do you want for it, or have I got something you want?" And I said, "Well, actually, yes, you've got a I can't remember what it was now. Well, two bows, and he had a Deer and Dak Predator,
Hmm.
which was another Bernie experience. And he had a Bernie Bose, or it could have been the other one, Textox. He had
Yep.
something else. And I said, "How about those two?" He said, "Yeah, okay." So he shipped them to me, but he declared the value as what he thought they were worth. So when they got here, they got stuck in customs, and I had to pay, I don't know, 20% or something, a very large customs fee to get them out.
Hmm.
And I just thought, this is kind of silly because you do the deal and then you end up paying a huge tax on top of it.
Right.
I need to explore how to avoid the tax payment part. So that kind of put me off acquiring anything from the US again,
Hmm.
and shipping.
Yeah, I know. That's why it's if you notice stuff that I put on for sale on Facebook, the everything
Yeah.
traditional page, US sales only. Yeah, because it gets difficult.
In the UK now, back in just before COVID, you could ship a bow. And when I first started, you could ship a bow for about 6 or 7 quid. All right.
Hmm.
Nowadays, the minimum you could ship for is 30 quid. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
talking one piece bows. Takedowns are always easier. One piece bows, it's a minimum of 30 quid. Yeah.
right,
Potentially more. And so, unless you're going to buy many bows and have them shipped in one package, because the size, typically the weight of the
right,
package does not affect the price. It's just not worth it anymore. If you're buying a bow for 30 quid and then they want over 30 quid to ship it,
right. I
that
know.
defeats the point.
I was in northern U.S. a couple of months ago, and I purchased a couple of bows, and my friend has them, so I'm going to ship him an empty box filled with bubble wrap with a return label to ship me
Yeah.
these bows in one box. Um, it's going to cost probably about $50 to ship it from Baltimore, Maryland, to where I'm at in Florida. Um, but that's why I don't buy anything over 64 inches now, because length is
Yeah.
everything, right? And shipping now, you're familiar with pirateship.com, correct?
No, I've not heard of them actually.
All right, check them out. Pirateship.com. It's one word,
Uh-huh.
pirateship.com. They're a commercial shipper, if you will. So when you log in, it doesn't cost you anything to log in and become a member. You're using their commercial license to ship bows.
Uh-huh.
So a bow that would normally cost me $45 to ship is now costing me $23. They're
That's a good
and
scheme.
they're making their money based on the volume.
That sounds like a damn good scheme.
Yeah, it is.
I I had a bad experience in the UK. I had a small number of bear bows.
Hmm.
I had a grizzly and a couple of others, and they didn't really fit in my collection. And I knew a guy down in Wales, the other end of our country,
Hmm.
who was seemed to be collecting bear bows. So I said, "Hey, I've got these three. Do you want them?" He said, "What do you want for them?" I said, "Well, you can have them for what I paid for them." And we agreed a deal. And I booked a shipper. And I booked it on a Thursday for collection on a Friday. And
Hmm.
they'd be with him on the Monday. Well, Friday came and no one turned up to collect the bows. I thought, okay, they got stuck. They'll maybe turn up tomorrow. Or by Sunday night, I'd not had an email. I'd had nothing. No one had turned up for them. So I got
Hmm.
hold of. I did it through an aggregator. I booked somebody else and said, look, give me my money back. So the company gave me my money back. And on Monday, the original company turned up at the guy's place where I was shipping them to, said, "Oh, I've got a package here for you." And he said, I jumped in the back of the van and came back out and said, "I can't find it." Well, they then marked it as delivered. And the aggregator got back to me and said, "We want that money back. We refunded you. We want it back. Your bows have just been delivered."
Oh, they
I said,
haven't.
"No, they haven't.
I'm
There's a
looking at them.
picture of them stood by my front door. Here's the package. They're still here. That courier is having a laugh here, as we say." Um, you know, After a short while, they eventually said, okay. They never actually apologized for demanding their money
Of
back.
course not.
And I said, well, you want to dump that courier because if they're lying to you and to me, so that kind of put me off
Yeah,
sending stuff.
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So, where do you see traditional archery and collecting in the future? Let's say in your world in the next 10 to 15 years.
I think collecting will decline because a lot of bows have already been snapped up, hidden
Mhm.
away. Um, I'd hope not, because there's a few gaps still like to fill, not at any cost, but I think it's in decline. and part of that will also be governed by costs,
Right.
because unless you live nearby and can fetch it, um, in the States it might be slightly different. And I think obviously as time passes, there will be less and less of these older bows on the market.
Hmm.
And then every so often you get, like happened in the UK, you might have saw my problem. There was a big collector in the States, in the UK, and living in England. He
Hmm.
had thousands of bows.
I
He
know.
died
There's a
last
video.
year.
There's a video of him on YouTube.
Yeah. So I bought 20 of his bows because no one wanted to buy any of his collection. They all went to auction, to a military and um, weaponry kind of
Auction.
auction.
Yeah.
Um, I was watching 20 Scottish bows. There was one item, 20 Scottish bows, and there was one in there I wanted, and the others I didn't mind having. But I couldn't be bothered to go to bid at the auction, and I couldn't be bothered to drive down to London to fetch them.
Hmm.
But I had a mate who said, "Yeah, you go and bid on them or whatever, and I'll collect them." Well, I didn't bid. They didn't sell. And after the event, I approached the auctioneer and said, I hear they didn't sell. Are you looking to sell them? Yeah, make an offer. So I made him a small offer. They said, yeah, okay.
30 quid.
So, but it was a lot, just, it wasn't much more than that.
Right.
Um, 200 quid for 20 bows, 10 quid each.
Nice. Nice. I love hearing it.
I just thought, and I had people like Jason Dulac, you know him as
Oh
well.
yeah. I
Yeah,
podcasted.
Jason said,
Yes.
"Can I have that one?" And Bob Frank said, "Oh, I like that one." I said, "Well, I'm not too keen on shipping them to you, but hey, you never know."
We'll give it a go.
And then I went through. My mate picked them all up, took them home. His wife then got said, "When are you going to get rid of those things?" So he shipped. He said, "Right, Bern, how do you want? What do you want shipped to you first?" And so I picked 10 bows. He actually put 11. He packaged them. He individually bubble wrapped them, taped them all together, got boxing, put them in a box, taped all that, shipped them up to me, and then a courier lost them and basically said, "Get lost, claim off the insurance."
Oh geez. Here we go again.
Yeah. So that's put me off. So that was, economical to buy
Hmm.
20 in one go and ship them in a couple of lots up to Scotland.
Hmm.
But not again, I don't think. I don't, no fault to my mate. The courier company has a bad rep in this country, that particular company.
Right.
Um, I've had lots of bows delivered by them before, but never anything like that. They actually said the package was damaged, we have disposed of it. And that was all they would ever say. You could never speak to a human being. It's amazingly bad customer service.
Oh, sure, for sure. Absolutely.
Uh,
So,
so that's put me off a bit.
so Bernie, what is the one bow or collectible item that has eluded you?
In the UK, British made stuff. Um, One I've never seen an example of. I've never seen one for sale. I've never seen someone taking pictures of saying, "Hey, I've got one. I'm not selling it, but I've got one." I've only ever seen adverts for it, and I've spoken to one person who vaguely recollects it being made. So I shoot with a guy who was a bowyer at Borders from 1971 till 2016. And he remembers making one of these, or these bows being made, and it's a Kings of Kelso Aquarius, it's
I've
called.
heard of that.
And it's a takedown. It's like the Wood Riser Executive.
Hmm.
It's the same very curvaceous limb butts, yeah, like the P2, except it's got a metal riser.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's the first, was probably what would have been one of the first metal riser bows also in the UK. So it was, I think, design was based on the executive, but it was new materials and so on.
Okay.
And like I say, I've never seen one. So I presume just because of its rarity and the fact there's none around, I'd like to compare it with the Wood Riser one to see how that went. Um, that's kind of it. I don't really have anything else in the UK that came along. Like you say, the 60s was the period. I've got that well covered. I've got the 70s well covered. Um, by the 80s, things are all getting a bit silly.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
that many different bows and imports and stuff. Um, so I think it's time to stop a little bit.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, Bernie, I want to thank you. We're on an hour here, and this is an experiment, obviously, and
Yeah.
I think it went well. But how can folks find you to send you their bows for 30 quid?
I look for me. Look for Bernie Trace on Google. You'll find me.
Excellent.
Or Bernhard. Use my full name, Bernhard. Facebook. I don't really go on any other social media. Um, you
Excellent.
can give out my email, but
Or reach out to me, guys.
yeah,
People, I can
yeah,
hook you up with Bernie for sure. Um,
yeah.
well, I want to thank you again, Bernie. Wonderful time. Excellent. Episode 119, folks. And I'm going to publish this within the hour. So I'm going to send you a link.
All right.
So everybody, one last parting words: take care of each other, love each other, respect each other. And if mental health is a big deal these days. If you see something, say something, embrace that person. Show them the right path.
Yeah.
But Bernie, have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and thank you again for sharing your story.
Okay. Hope I didn't bore you, and I hope
No,
the people that listen don't get too bored.
nope,
One
nope.
last word. One last sentence. The accent's Plymouth.
Plymouth, okay, excellent.
Where
My
Francis Drake set sail to defeat the Spanish Armada.
and my accent is Jersey. So, all right, Bernie, have a good weekend. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rich.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.